Hello, everyone. It's Francis Widdowson here. Thank you very much for joining me today. Anyway, so there's a lot of things happening. For people who are not aware of what's going to be happening next week, I wanted to just fill you in on some of the details. So, for people who are unaware of the Office of the Special Interlocutor, Kimberly Murray, she is going to have the release of her, what's called her reparations framework, next week on October 29th and October 30th in Gatineau, Quebec. And this is an amazing event that's going to happen, because Kimberly Murray herself has admitted that there's no missing children. She did this a year ago, but she's got a whole who's who of rent seekers on the agenda, including Leah Gazan, who wants to make residential school denialism illegal. There's a panel on confronting residential school denialism with who I call the Uber clown. I can't stop calling him the Uber clown because I just find him so objectionable. I cannot take him seriously. And this is Sean Carlton, who is a supposed professor at the University of Manitoba. Roseanne Casimir, who's the chief of the Kamloops band, and Tanya Talaga, who's a so-called journalist with the Globe and Mail. Anyway, Murray, Talaga, Casimir were all hobnobbing at some film, kind of celebration a while ago, which Nina Green has documented. So this is like a network of people who are just exploiting the fact that everyone has compassion for marginalized Indigenous people. And it's an outrage. It's an absolute outrage. This is, I believe, at the Hilton. Several ballrooms in the Hilton that this is going to unfold at. Anyway, that's happening on October 29th and October 30th. And coincidentally, I didn't plan this. If I were religious, which I'm not, I would have assumed it was some kind of, alignment of the forces in the universe. But it's just a coincidence. I'm going to be in Ontario at Wilfrid, Laurier, and Brock University doing critical events of these matters. So I'm pretty chuffed. I'm pretty chuffed about this happening. Anyway, so just to give you a breakdown of the situation, I fly out tomorrow morning to Toronto and I rent a car. I'm renting a car at the at Pearson, and then I'm going to drive to Waterloo to meet my friends, my good friends, Will McNally and Jeff Horseman, and hopefully other people as well. Great people, part of the Society for Academic Freedom and Scholarship Network, but also members of Heterodox. And Heterodox is an interesting organization. I can't be a member because they found out about my satire, Francis McGrath, and they think that somehow makes me ineligible, which I find is a bit amusing. But still, they do some good things, so I'm happy to be involved in whatever way I can with them. Anyway, I'm giving a talk at 7 o'clock that night on what are Indigenous ways of knowing, and what place do they have in the university. I've done a presentation for this, and then Michael, who I don't know, he's a member of Heterodox, he's done a chat GPT or artificial intelligence analysis of the Laurier Indigenous Ways of Knowing document, because, and it's got questions on this basis, because we had invited the VP Indigenization, whose name is Thomas, I believe his last name is Thomas, to come, as well as all the other Indigenous studies, bright lights in that area, to come and, hold me to account for my unacceptable views. Anyway, of course, they're not going to do it. And there, I believe, someone has got wind of a protest that's going to be held at Laurier, housed in this kind of Indigenous studies area. Anyway, so they've got a bunch of questions that have been generated through a chat GPT kind of analysis of Laurier's Indigenous Ways of Knowing document. And so I'm going to give my presentation, which is going to be posted on the wokeacademy.info site. And then we're going to have about 20 minutes where they're going to pose these questions to me that they've generated, which would be kind of the position, what's perceived to be the position of Laurier. And then we're going to have question and answer with the audience. So the details for where the room, I can't remember it right now, but that's all been provided on Heterodox, William McNally's Twitter account, the wokeacademy.info's Twitter account, this Facebook page, and so on. So I'm really looking forward to that. I think that's going to be a very interesting discussion. I'm hoping there'll be some people who are critics of me who will show up, but as we have seen historically, this has never seemed to work out because the woke do not want to debate. They want to impose their irrational position on everyone and make opposition to what they're doing illegal. That's really, and they use compassion to do it. They pretend that they're compassionate, loving and kind, just trying to bring people together with humility and grace, but that's just to make people off balance and less able to fight back against them. So don't be fooled by this kind of nonsense. They are so far from that. It's ridiculous. Oh, my audio level is low. I don't know why that is the case. I'll just talk louder. I apologize for the audio being low, but I'll try to talk with my professor's voice into the speaker system here. So that's Laurier. And then in the morning, the next morning, which is Tuesday the 29th, then I will be driving to St. Catharines, to Brock University. And this, I don't know what's going to happen. There's been things, according to the whistleblowing site at Brock, I don't know who runs it. It's called Brock Civis. Anyway, it gets tips on, things happening at Brock, and evidently there's trouble brewing, I've been told, at Brock. Bring it on. Bring it on, politically correct totalitarians. I am not going to be cowed at all by anything that you have planned. And if you cancel me, I will come in. Well, I'm coming in anyway with this, but I'm going to do Spectrum Street epistemology. I've got my sound system. I've got my mats. I'm going to go in there anyway. And we don't have as good court decisions about freedom of expression in Ontario. If you serve me with a trespass notice, I will not voluntarily leave campus, because I see myself as the person who's protecting the academic character of your university. So you will have to remove me from campus. And we'll see how well that looks. That here I am trying to have some critical thinking about all the nonsense that is going on, and you are trying to remove me from your campus. So I don't think that that is a good move on your part to do this. But what's planned is I was supposed to be giving a public talk on indigenization and academic freedom, lessons from my case, but because people are smelling a cancellation, what's happened is that now that all my stuff is going to be held in a class of Tamara Kitozas, who is a person who studies the Black experience in, I guess, in the Americas. I know it's in Canada, and I know he looks at the American situation. Anyway, Tamari and I had a great conversation for about 3 hours for his podcast. Unfortunately, his editor has not been well, so that's not been edited, but that's going to be coming out hopefully in the next week or so. And we had a wide-ranging conversation about some of our shared interests and also where we differed from one another. Anyway, Tamari and I have very, very different views on many things, but he is a free speech advocate. He's had problems himself because of the Israel-Palestinian conflict and his support for the Palestinians and his criticisms of Israel. And I completely support his right to put forward his criticisms of Israel. So we have a shared position on these matters, which I think is the basis of the coalition that we need to build right now, because what we're fighting for now is the right to discuss all these issues in universities which we have lost, and that's what's got to be fought for now before we can get into the actual left-wing, right-wing types of arguments, the arguments that we used to have between socialists and conservatives and classical liberals. That doesn't exist anymore in universities, so we're fighting for that. Anyway, so I'm going to be in his class on the 29th, which is Tuesday, from 12 to 3, talking about my presentation. I'm going to post my presentation there on the wokeacademy.info site, so you'll be able to see that, and I'm hoping to do an event at some point about this, and maybe bring in Lloyd Hawkeye Robertson so that Lloyd can give his comments on my presentation that he was not able to give in Regina because of the thugs that were disrupting that presentation. So I still want to go into more detail on that publicly, but it's just not going to happen at Brock. Anyway, there's going to be some select professors invited and the students. And then I believe for the last hour we're going to do Spectrum Street epistemology in the class to help students to understand how you discuss things intellectually, even if you disagree, and how you try to reach an understanding of the position of people who have differences with you. These are important skills that students need to be able to acquire but are not getting because of all the activism that has intruded into the universities. Anyway, that's happening from 12 to 3. And then at 7, that's when we have I think we're going to have the real showdown, is on the Kamloops case. So the grave error at Kamloops and its relationship to academic freedom, like the ability to discuss the Kamloops case, and whether we can actually discuss whether it's a hoax or not. That's one of the important questions, is that there's people that I know, Tom Flanagan and Jaime Rubenstein, who argue that it is a hoax, and then Sean Carlton, Reed Gerhardt, I think that's his name, and Megan Sinclair, who argue that it's not a hoax, and in fact, the hoax, according to them, is people like myself talking about it as if it's a hoax. That's a very confusing argument that they're making, but I want to just discuss that. And then my own position, which is, I don't know if that's a helpful way to talk about what's going on, to label it as a hoax. And these are all going to be fleshed out. The presentation itself is on the wokeacademy.info site, which you can take a look at. Anyway, I've heard that there's going to be a lot of opposition to this talk. Maybe it won't. Maybe there won't. Maybe there won't be. I don't really know. I haven't seen anything yet. It's quiet, as they say, quiet, too quiet. So people are perhaps planning things behind closed doors. I don't know if that's what's going on. Anyway, if there's no protest, that's fine. If there is a protest, well, fine. And Brock, if you're listening, Brock University, all you need to do, and this is all the University of Alberta had to do, all the University of Regina had to do, is put out an announcement telling people that they have a right to protest. That is a democratic right. But you do not have a right to shut down speakers. Everyone has a right to put forward their view. And if you do disrupt and stop people from speaking, you will be subject to code of conduct violations. You're not allowed to do that. That's all universities have to do. But they're very reluctant to do this. And we saw that at the University of Alberta, where they brought in thousands of dollars of security but did not make that announcement. And it's an interesting question as to why those basic types of statements are not made. Anyway, so that's happening from 7 to 9. And the information for that is on the wokeacademy.info site and is on Brock Civis's account. It's also on the wokeacademy.info Twitter account. So there's lots of different places you can get that information. So that's on the 29th. And coincidentally, as I mentioned, there's going to be this extravaganza of nonsense being perpetuated in the Gatineau at the Hilton, I believe. We'd like to know how much that's going to cost, all of this. Millions of dollars again for Kimberly Murray and her merry band of totalitarians to try to stop people from understanding what's going on with respect to the residential schools. And then the next day, on that, the 29th, Greg Wycliffe, who is a freedom of expression advocate, he's going to be coming to Brock on the evening of the 29th to watch the lecture and document that lecture. The next day, I'm going to be meeting with him for an interview about his documentary on free speech in Canada. And then Greg and I and whomever else wants to join us at Brock is going to have a Spectrum Street epistemology session. And so he's on Twitter. You can find his account on Twitter if you want to find out more about that. I don't know Brock University very well, so I don't know the best places to have Spectrum Street epistemology, but we want to do that. And the topic, the claim is, which is very, very fitting, considering what's happening in Gatineau, residential school denialism should be illegal. And we've just seen the question to this regard in the Globe and Mail today. I haven't read the piece yet. It was also in City News in Toronto. They had the Uber clown being quoted, and he used to protest against that and say, no, we don't want to make residential school denialism illegal. He was pretending that was his position. But it's good to see he's now being honest, and he now supports making residential school denialism illegal. He's a disgrace, a complete disgrace to universities. Any professor who's arguing that historical debates should be made illegal are not qualified to be a professor. Because, and Carlton made some comment about, the truth is already known about these matters. That's not how the academic, environment works. The truth is never known. The truth, we're searching for the truth. And we have evidence, arguments, logic. That's how we determine, we get closer to the truth. We never reach the truth, but we get closer to it. And Uber Clown is doing all that he can to prevent people from getting closer to the truth. So Anyway, so that's all happening on the 30th, which is coincidentally the same time that Uber Clown, Roseanne Casimir, and Tanya Talaga, the enemies of truth, the absolute enemies of truth, are giving their, what I'll call a circle jerk, are getting on with their circle jerk in Gatineau. What an embarrassment that is. And Canadian public is paying for this. It's really quite astonishing that this is happening. Anyway, so that's on the 30th. So that's going to be very interesting. That's going to be a lot of, there's going to be a lot of documentation, a lot of videotaping, and we can hopefully do another documentary like what happened in Regina, the University of Regina Rumble. For people who haven't watched that documentary, you should really watch it. It's on YouTube and gives you a bit of a sense of the complete meltdown that happened at the University of Regina. So, and I come back from Ontario, and on Friday, November 1st, the Faculty of Arts, my old faculty, Mary Lee Mulholland, and if you go look at the arbitration decision of David Philip Jones, you'll see Mary Lee Mulholland's testimony in my arbitration case. I'm going to have more to say about Dr. Mulholland in the future, but she's in charge of this invitation. Well, it was done through some committee that awarded money to bring in Dr. Keisha Supernant from the University of Alberta as the distinguished speaker. That's going to be happening on November 1st. That's Friday at 2:00 p.m. Next to the Uber Clown Sean Carlton and Negon Sinclair, Keisha Supernant is the worst purveyor of misinformation on the residential schools, and she's supposedly an archaeologist who engages in scientific GPR, ground penetrating radar work. I am going to go in there with Kathy Drake to Mount Royal, first time at Mount Royal, doing Spectrum Street epistemology at Mount Royal University on November 1st, Friday, 12:00 noon. And we are going to look at the claim: universities should foster respect for Indigenous ways of knowing. And both Keisha Supernant and the Indigenous Strategic Plan argue strongly that they strongly agree for this claim. I'm in strong disagreement with that claim, and I don't know what Kathy's position is on it. But if you're interested in Spectrum Street epistemology, you should come to Mount Royal University on Friday, November 1st, and go to this Spectrum Street epistemology session first, and then go to the Keisha Supernant lecture, which is going to be from 2 to, I think, 4, and then there's going to be a reception. So the idea here is not to cancel, not to shut down, to have critical thinking that is deployed. And Supernant is in favor of something she calls heart-centered archaeology. And this tries to bring emotions into the discussions about, for example, whether there are 215, the remains of 215 children in the apple orchard at Kamloops. And it is highly improbable that that is the case, but I would think that if you bring in this heart-centered archaeology, you're not going to be able to make that argument, because there could be Indigenous school survivors who are very upset with, people questioning the testimonies of Indigenous residential school survivors. And as I was doing in the University of Regina Rumble documentary, I was mentioning the case of Billy Coombs, who argued that Queen Elizabeth II had abducted 10 children from the Kamloops Indian Residential School in 1964. And Keisha Supernant would have us believe Billy Coombs if we're going to use this heart-centered approach. So I don't think heart-centered approaches are good for the sciences. I think they have a terribly corrosive impact, because we need to be as objective as possible, and this just muddies the waters and makes it difficult for people to state what they think is true, and also results in people being, using compassion to stop people from engaging in critical thinking and having an intellectual approach. And universities are not supposed to be therapy sessions. That's not what we're doing at universities. You can go to a psychiatrist. Go do that. But stop trying to bring therapy and all these emotional kinds of tactics into the universities, which is really having a terrible impact. And that's why we are where we are with the discussions about the residential schools, because people have been way too cautious, and they have not been calling things as they see them and holding people to account for the irrational and highly improbable ideas that are being circulated with respect to this unmarked graves issue. So Leslie has said, Francis McGrath. Who is Francis McGrath? Francis McGrath is my satirical Twitter account, where I pose as the nemesis of Francis Widdowson. And that's what got me into all the trouble that I got into at Mount Royal University. And people keep on telling me not to do this anymore. But I think it's got an important role to play, because what I do is I just slightly exaggerate what the woke are doing. And I think it's a good way, through humor, how to expose what, to be honest, is craziness that's going on in the universities. Like, how can you take this seriously? It is just amusing. It is really quite amusing. And humor is one of the most effective tools against the woke. And so, and it's modeled, Francis McGrath is modeled on the Twitter account of Andrew Doyle, which is called Titania McGrath. And Francis McGrath is Titania McGrath's sister-in-law, sister with an X. And so I know Andrew Doyle is much better at this than I am, but I'm trying to provide some humor in this absurd type of environment that we are living in right now. So occasionally I do put out a satirical tweet about the craziness that's unfolding. Anyway, so that's what's happening, just as a repeat. On October 29th at Laurier, 7 p.m. on Indigenous ways of knowing. What are they, or what is Indigenous ways of knowing? I don't know if it's singular or plural. And what place do they have? Secondly, Brock University on Tuesday, October 29th. I'm going to have the class that I'm doing from 12 to 3. And then at 7, that's going to be the grave error at Kamloops. And then the next day, October 30th, I'm doing an interview with Greg Wycliffe on his free speech documentary. And then we are going to do some Spectrum Street epistemology that's going to be announced once I do a bit of, scoping out of Brock to find out the best place to do that. And that will be announced, an hour or so before we do that. And that will be live streamed by Greg. And Greg Wycliffe, if you just look him up on Twitter, you'll be able to find his account. And then on Friday, November 1st, it's going into the belly of the beast which is Mount Royal University. I've done 3 sessions at University of Calgary. It's time to bring this to Mount Royal. And I don't want to wait, because they are having Keisha Supernant come in. And this, in my view, to not have a critical kind of a response is educational malpractice. And my institution, Mount Royal University, needs me. And I am at the service of my institution. I am going to be providing some critical commentary and critical questioning about Indigenous ways of knowing, which it's a bit of a mixed bag. Sometimes it does have some contributions that can be made. Local knowledge is one aspect, but that's something that all people have. It's not something special to Indigenous people. But a lot of these things are not ways of, they're not ways of obtaining knowledge, which is what is implied by ways of knowing. They are beliefs that people have, which everyone is entitled to have their beliefs, but you don't have the right to get other people to demand that other people pretend that your irrational beliefs are true. No one should be able to demand that of other people, and this whole language about fostering respect for Indigenous ways of knowing, this is turning it into a prescribed doctrine, which, as we all know who study academic freedom, you're supposed to be protected from having a prescribed doctrine imposed upon people at universities. And if you don't protect people from that, then you will have institutional censorship. And that is what is going on now in universities. And we need to fight now and fight hard against what's happening at universities in Canada right now. Any questions people have? Thank you very much for listening. I will be live streaming the Wilfrid Laurier talk at 7 o'clock tomorrow night, and I will be live streaming the Grave Eric Kamloops talk at 7 from the Rational Space Network's Facebook page, and Greg Wycliffe will be live streaming things on Wednesday, October 30th, and then Kathy Drake at Nula Moon Snail, so NULAMOONSNAIL on what used to be called Twitter and is now X, will be live streaming the Spectrum Street Epistemology from Mount Royal University at 12 o'clock noon Mountain Time. Thanks very much for listening, everyone. I look forward to what's going to happen next week, and then we can do a bit of a debrief on the weekend to see what transpired. Thank you very much.